So if you're a new woodworker, one of the hardest things to do if you're new to it, you don't have any tools, you're just getting into it, is really trying to figure out what is it that you actually need to get. There's so many tools out there that you can get for woodworking, but a lot of it really is going to depend on what it is that you want to do. But there are some basics that you can start with. Now, welcome back to another video. My name is Dave, and I've teamed up with the Woodworking for Beginners channel, which is an amazing Facebook group that is kind of geared towards a large community of people sharing information with one another and tips and tricks about all kinds of different things. So if you haven't checked it out, I really encourage you to check out that Woodworking for Beginners Facebook group. It's absolutely awesome. All right, and we've got people from all kinds of experience. What I want to do today is I want to go through some of the basic tools that you should maybe consider or keep in mind for whatever projects it is that you're going to do. Okay, and there's a few basic ones that I would recommend starting with. Now, the first ones that I would recommend starting with is a drill and driver. Okay, so here we have got a regular, this happens to be a cordless hammer drill, but by no means do you use need a hammer drill. This is just a cordless drill. These things are cheap. Amazon puts them on sale, different brands, all kinds of big box stores put these things on sale all the time. For me, I go with the Rigid brand, and the only reason I go with the Rigid brand is because they've got a lifetime warranty, and I have had to use it before for replacing these batteries, and it's really, really easy. And so you end up with a tool that's reliable and it lasts a long time. And I've actually compared these ones to some Milwaukee drills, and at least the Milwaukee ones that I compared it to, these ones performed way better anyways. Funny enough, Rigid and Milwaukee are made by and owned by the same company, so likely made in the same factory. So a good drill, something like this, is going to be an essential one to have. With this, these drills have, and most of them are going to have 2 steps for speed on them. So when you need to drill a hole quickly, you can put it on speed 2, and you can go like this. Most of them are going to have a variable trigger, and this is going to spin really quickly. If you're putting in a screw and you want to make sure that you're not going to strip it, or you just need it to spin slower, you can put this to gear 1. And the variable trigger on this is going to function the same, except this is going to spin a lot slower to allow you to gain more control. In addition to that, all of these drills have a chuck on them here. This chuck, or sorry, I shouldn't say a chuck. This is actually the chuck here that you're going to be spinning to hold the bit in. But this here is what adjusts your level of torque, or your clutch, I guess is what it would be. If on mine, if I have this here at 100, that means that if this thing starts to really get against some tough material, it's going to drill right through it. So having it all the way up to the top is really good if you're going to be drilling holes. If you're going to be putting a screw in, then you could set this on mine, let's say at 20. And what that's going to do is, as I put something like this in, it's going to skip. So that way it doesn't overstrip the screw. So that's just a little tip on that one. So definitely a driver like this is going to be handy. An impact driver, this is something that you don't necessarily need, but oftentimes you can buy these in a set. Okay, this set, these ones in particular, I like because this impact driver has 3 speeds: 1, 2, and 3. 3 is very quick, and then this one here, 1, is very similar to this, and of course variable triggers as well. So this is not a necessity, but I like this. It's got a really high amount of torque. It's a lot smaller, lighter, and more compact than a regular driver is, but very handy. Now, so whatever the brand is, it really doesn't matter. These are Rigid ones. Oftentimes these are in Canada anyways about 250 bucks, so they're pretty good. Now if you're going to use something like those, The other thing that you're going to need is bits to go along with them. So I would recommend, as far as getting basic bits, is to get some of the ones you're going to use all the time. This is a red Robertson bit, or a number 2, the square. So you're going to want some of those. This is a number 2 Phillips bit, or some know it as the star bit, or the plus symbol, or whatever it is. You're probably going to want some of those. And I have them in a regular shaft size here, as well as in longer ones. Keep in mind, with longer ones, there is a bit more wobble on them when they're spinning. So you're not going to want to use something like this for everything, but certainly for some things. So those are the 2 bits I would recommend, certainly, that you start with. For the drill, if you're going to be using screws to hold your project together, I would recommend this. It's a countersink bit. This one in particular can go into the impact driver or the regular drill. It's got the drill bit here to drill the hole, and then around there it's got some teeth that are sticking out to about 3/8 of an inch, which is roughly the diameter of most deck screw heads, and similar to other screws. So it'll actually drill a countersunk hole for your screw head to go in, as well as putting a small hole, as long as it's smaller than the diameter of your screw, into the material. So that way, when you put a screw in without a pilot hole, it would split it. With this, it won't. Okay. And then I've got some of these other bits here. This is simply for the countersink of a screw head, and that's it, in the event that we have to use a smaller drill bit to drill a pilot hole. The next thing that I would recommend is an orbital sander, something like this. So there are different sanders available that you can get. This is, of course, corded. If you work stationary in a shop, you can absolutely get these battery powered. Battery powered ones may only last 20-25 minutes on a charge, so it can be really annoying if it dies on you. Get a cordless one, or a corded one like this. You'll never have that problem. Plus, they have a little bit more power to them. An orbital sander like this one. So this is a Bosch. This cost me about $100 at Canadian Tire. I think I bought it at a little while ago. So it's not really that expensive. The nice part about an orbital sander is that when this actually spins to sand, so it's spinning like this, as well as vibrating a little bit. And in doing that, you can essentially sand your piece in any direction, and you don't have to worry about going across grain with the grain, because it's not going to leave those types of marks, and it removes a fair amount of material. When you use a sheet sander, which is just a square sheet that vibrates, that you have to go with the grain, or because if you go across the grain, you'll see the scratch marks in it. Same with the belt sander, you have to go with the grain. This one here, you don't. So that is nice. Most of them use a hook and loop setup. Hook and loop is just a really fancy term for Velcro. And you can get all of these different discs. You can buy fancy ones. You can buy cheap ones on Amazon of these too. And there's all kinds of different grits. So when you're getting something like this, get one that's a hook and loop. This has got 8 holes around it. The 8 holes here is for the purpose of dust collection, so it can be sucked out through here. For the paper, I deal with different grits. So I use a 60 grit, an 80 grit, a 120, a 180, and a 220. So those are the different types of grits that I use. The smaller the number, the more coarse the grit is, the more material it's going to remove. Sorry. When you're getting all the way up to 220 grit, that is where you're removing much less material, but instead what you're actually doing is smoothing out a project that much more. So it's more of a finished surface, whereas 60 and 80 grits, this is a 60 grit, is intended for material removal and leveling out and that sort of stuff. So just make sure when we put it on there, that you always try to line up the holes. So you can get paper like this. You can also, if you're going to the big box stores, you can buy a mesh paper as well that will automatically line up to these ones, so you wouldn't have any issues, because it's just the dust gets sucked through a mesh. So that works as well. So as far as a sander, this is definitely a tool that you'd want to have. If you're just getting into it, you don't want to spend tons of money, you want something decent, I would personally recommend this Bosch. It is fairly cheap for what it does. I've used a DeWalt one as well. This one is much better than the DeWalt, less vibration to it. Yeah, it's got some weight, but you're going to have it down on a surface. It's not the end of the world. If you're using battery operated, going to be even heavier than these ones. So if you're going to be doing a lot of sanding, get an electric version of an orbital sander. A 5-inch is pretty standard. You can get a 6-inch too, more expensive, but the 5-inch would work really well. Now, depending on the projects that you're going to be doing, there's a couple of other tools that could come in really handy. Okay. The first one is a jigsaw. And a jigsaw, using a blade like this, and it just connects into the saw like that, and you can use this to push around a project to do round cuts and all kinds of different profile cuts. These here are incredibly handy. So mine is a little bit of a different one made by Rigid, and again, this I don't believe this one is even made anymore, but it's a barrel grip, and it's really handy because it's cordless, and I don't use this for long periods of time. I don't usually need to. So because of that, being cordless works really well. And this is actually a multi-tool, so the head on this one comes off, and then I can put other heads on also. A jigsaw is something that I would recommend if you're planning on doing projects that are fine detail, where you need to cut around grooves and corners, and you don't have a scroll saw or a band saw or something. This is a tool that you can easily get away with doing those types of cuts. Now, there is one thing that you have to be cautious about. When you use this, if you put too much pressure, if you can see this, what happens is the blade can bend to the side like that. So when you use a jigsaw, if you're putting too much pressure on it and you're not letting it guide itself, then you're going to end up with a cut that is not perfectly square. Okay, so when I say not perfectly square, if we look at that, it would be this part bent over to the side. And then you might have a little bit of a problem with the edge. So when you use something like this, just make sure that blade is not bending. And speaking of this, if you get a jigsaw, make sure you get a set of different types of blades. This is, again, a $15 or $20 at Home Depot. It's very cheap. But there's fast cuts, there's fine cuts. There's even reverse cuts where the teeth are going to pull the material in a different direction. Typically, the way this works is the teeth cut in the upward direction, which forces the material against this base plate, which kind of pinches it and forces it to cut. So it makes it a little bit easier. But you can get blades with cut direct in the opposite direction as well. It's entirely up to you. It doesn't matter. But a jigsaw is definitely something that I would recommend. Now, if you don't have a miter saw, or you can call it a chop saw, but it's really called a miter saw. You don't have a table saw for making different types of cuts. At very least, you want to start out with having something like this. This is a circular saw. Again, it's a cordless one. I would recommend going corded. If you're going to be in a shop, I have a cordless and a corded one. This one I use primarily because I do have a table saw. I do have a miter saw, so I don't have to use it a lot. So where I do need it for small, short things, this works perfect for me. Okay, so this is definitely something else that you want to have, and it's got all kinds of features. This one here, you can cut an angle up to 56 degrees. So that's really handy. You can cut a fair amount of depth. On this one here, the depth can go all the way up to 2¼ inches. So I'll pull this guard back, and so we can cut 2¼ inches down, which is pretty good. Okay, so this is a 7¼ inch, and this is a 36 tooth blade, so that's the 36T. So you can use this for all kinds of different cuts. I would just recommend that if you're going to use a saw like this, get a decent blade. So this one's made by CMT. CMT makes really good blades, but so does for mid-grade kind of is Diablo. If you wanted to go higher end, you can get Freud, you can get all kinds of other bits. It's entirely up to you. This is a great tool that you can use to either rip down your lumber or to cross-cut your lumber in the absence of anything else. Always preferable over this is going to be a table saw and a miter saw. But if you don't have those right away, don't worry about it. use something like this, works perfectly fine. Next on my list in terms of what I think is really beneficial for a beginner and actually for a woodworker, this one is going to be a must, we have to have it, is a tape measure. Okay, tape measures, these are what we use to make sure our projects are going to be the size that we want them to be. You'll see that my tape measure here, so this is a Stanley Fat Max. This one's measured just all in inches on both sides, because that's typically what I'm measuring by is inches, sorry, and then using the fractions in between, so a 1/16 of an inch, an 1/8 of an inch, 3/16 of an inch, and so on and so forth. Here's an important thing to know about tape measures. What you have to be aware of is if you're going to use a tape measure, wherever you can, try to stick to the exact same brand. Okay, with these tape measures, there can be inaccuracies on some of these lines. And so if you use, a Stanley for this project, and for the next project, let's say you use an Irwin, or for another piece on that same project, you use an Irwin, it is always possible that the way that this moves, because this is designed to move about a 1/16 of an inch, whether for either inside or outside. Okay, but there can be some differences. So when you're going to use two tape measures, two different ones on the same project, what I would suggest, put them side by side, pull them out like this. Okay, hold them up against an edge. Actually, I'll use this as an edge. Hold them both up against an edge like this, and pull them back, and make sure that those lines actually line up, so you're going to get the same measurement with both tapes. Okay, bigger isn't always better with these ones. I use a 16-foot. That is probably the most commonly used tape measure in my shop for any project, because it's smaller and it's easier to manage. If you're not planning on making anything that's going to be longer than 16 feet, then go with a 16-footer. I actually have some Stanley tape measures that are 6-footers on keychains, and their measurements still line up with this, which is great. And I have those ones hanging at my other tools. I have one at the table saw, one at the miter saw, in case I walk all the way over there and I forget my tape measure. I've got one sitting right there, and I know it's going to be accurate. So even the 6-foot ones are great, but 16-footer, that's a pretty standard one. That's probably the one that I would go with. After the tape measure, a couple of other things that you're going to want to get yourself. First one is a square. Okay, this is what we're going to use on our projects after we make our cuts to either determine whether an edge is going to be square like this, or like this, or like this, or is it the surface like that. This is really key. And in addition to that, we can use this for marking our lines like that to make sure that we get a straight line across the surface. So with these, you don't need woodpeckers. You don't need to spend tons and tons of money on these brands, but you definitely want to make sure that you have a decent square. This one was about 14 or 15 bucks. It didn't cost much. Okay, so that's going to be another important one. And of course, clamps. Clamps is another one that is incredibly important. We have to have clamps if we're going to be doing glue joints to hold things together. These here are just quick clamps that you can pull this little trigger here, and you can move it fairly quickly. And then when you get a project close enough, right, you go together like that, and then you pull the big trigger, just squish it together, it applies pressure, and then boom, that is nice and solid. So you want to get yourself some decent clamps. Now I have a bunch of different clamps here on my clamp rack. I have pipe clamps, I have some parallel clamps, I have F clamps, I have quick clamps like this, quick grip clamps. It's kind of a tongue twister. Entirely up to you to what as to what you get. If you're looking for something fast and easy, these clamps are absolutely amazing. If you're looking for something that you can change the length on, it's going to apply a decent amount of pressure, my recommendation would be go with pipe clamps, where you'll buy the end fittings, and then all you have to do is go to your local hardware store and buy either a threaded 1/2 inch or 3/4 inch pipe to thread the clamp on the one side, and then make it whatever length you would like. That is entirely up to you. So this one is threaded on to the end. This is a 48-inch clamp, and I can pinch this little holder here, and I can move this as far along as I want. And the nice part about this is with this device right here, that puts an incredibly large amount of pressure on whatever the project is. Keep in mind, with any project that you're doing, you shouldn't have to put that much pressure on the glue joints. You're going to actually risk popping them apart. You don't want to do that. You don't want to stress them out, right? You want to just apply enough pressure to kind of close it together as much as you can. So keep that in mind, but there's all kinds of different clamps that you can get. Last thing that I would recommend is a decent pencil. Okay, so I use one of these Pica pencils. You don't have to use one of those. You can have just regular pencils. What I actually like to use oftentimes are these kinds of pencils here. This is just a red pencil. It is intended for woodworking because it sticks out a lot better. But this might be something that you want to consider. Just make sure you've got some sort of pencil or something. Well, I hope this video gave you some information that you might be able to use, might help you and in making your decision on the tools that you might need as a beginning woodworker. Now, keep in mind, depending on what you want to build, the tools are going to be different. So if you're just getting into woodworking, but you're going to build bandsaw boxes, then it's not necessarily all of these tools that you're going to want. One of your main investments is going to be the bandsaw. So depending on what you're doing, the tools that you're going to require may change. They may vary, but these are some of the basics ones. If you're going to build some crafty stuff, if you're going to want to look at starting some furniture, those sorts of things, then that's where these tools are going to come in handy. Some that are going to work no matter what and are necessary: your tape measure, your clamps, your pencils, your square, your sander, even those are absolutely necessary. But some of the other ones are optional. If you're never going to use screws, you're never going to drill holes, then you may not need to use these drills. So that really is entirely up to you. All right, so thank you for watching this video. I wanted to encourage you to smash the like button and make sure you subscribe to this channel. In addition to that, don't forget to check out my YouTube channel, which is Weekend Woodworking 925. So I've got a lot of other videos posted over on my channel about different types of jigs, different types of tools, but also some of the other projects that I've been working on. So don't forget to check out my channel and then hit the like and subscribe button over there as well. All right. Until next time, we'll talk soon. Happy cutting.